The Canadian Challenger was built by the Davy Shipbuilding and Repair Company in Quebec and launched on the 7th of July 1921 for the Canadian Government Merchant Marine. In 1928 she passed to the Canadian National Steamship Limited, and in 1936, because of mergers and takeovers, she was then owned by the Montreal Australia New Zealand Line Limited. At the outbreak of the Second World War, two of this company's ships were taken over by the Counties Ship Management Company of London, also known as CSM. CSM would create a shipping company and allocate just one or two ships to it. In this case they created Ernell Shipping Company Limited and sold it Canadian Constructor and Canadian Challenger. Once the ships were transferred, they changed the names of these ships to Argus Hill and Barnhill respectively. At the beginning of March 1940, SS Barnhill, loaded with goods, sailed from Halifax, Nova Scotia for London. As far as I can tell, she sailed alone and not as part of a convoy. I don't know if this was because of her lack of escort ships or she was just considered fast enough to go it alone, but she made it across the Atlantic and up the Channel until a few miles south-southwest of Beachy Head. It was Wednesday, March the 20th at approximately 10:30 p.m. that Barnhill was attacked by a German Dornier. Accounts vary depending on which one you read, but she seems to have been hit amidships. One report saying that the bomb went down the funnel, but 4 officers on the bridge were killed and another died next day in hospital. As the fire roared up from the deck cargo of timber the ship was bringing from Nova Scotia, the survivors set about dragging injured comrades to safety. There was no sign of the captain. It was thought that he must have been killed in the first explosion. Minor explosions now began bursting out as the fire swept through the deck cargo. It was taking a firm hold, biting down through the wooden hatch covers and reaching the cargo below. The ship was doomed and everybody on board knew it. At Eastbourne Lifeboat Station, coxswain Michael Hardy received the emergency call just before 11 p.m. By 11:15 he had the motor lifeboat Jane Holland launched and away. Although the sea was running fairly high, the night was clear. In just over 2 hours they approached the blazing ship, now drifting about 6 miles off Beachy Head. In the macabre glare of the flames she made a grim sight. The bridge had been blasted forward and lay in a tangled mess over the fore-well deck. A Dutch boat, which was now standing by, signalled that she had been able to pick up 18 survivors from a raft, but that there were still men on board. Coxswain Hardy made straight for the burning hulk and skillfully took the lifeboat alongside. 11 men, grouped as far away from the flames as they could, waved and shouted. As Hardy manoeuvred the pitching lifeboat, the men were able, one by one, to drop from the hot side of the Barnhill and scramble to safety. The last man told Hardy that he thought nobody had been left on the doomed ship. The lifeboat put about and went alongside the Dutch vessel so she could take off the rescued men. Then Hardy made for the shore and arrived at Eastbourne at 3 a.m. But there was to be no rest for the lifeboat's crew that night. At 4:45 a.m. they were turned out in answer to a signal that astounded them. It came from a tug which had been unsuccessfully trying to put a tow line aboard the burning ship. It ran, "Injured man still lying off on the forecastle of Barnhill. Send lifeboat at once with a doctor." Then he launched again with his tired crew and reached the ship with the dawn at just after 6 a.m. The Barnhill had been drifting, getting dangerously close to the shore. She was rolling wildly in the rising sea and drifting abeam to the wind, while the flames from her blazing cargo reached 70 feet high. There were constant explosions coming from the burning mass, and debris and sparks flew in showers. From the tugmaster, Hardy learned the injured man was on the forecastle. He had dragged himself to the forecastle bell. By ringing it while his strength lasted, he had made the tugmen hear him. 2 of the lifeboat's crew, Alex Francis Huggett and Thomas Alcorn, volunteered to go on board the burning ship. Coxswain Hardy realised that it would be almost a suicidal move if attempted from the lifeboat. The ship's rails amidships were red hot. Those of her portholes, which had not splintered, had dissolved into molten glass which was dripping down the sides. The only way was to put them aboard from the tug, which could then play water from a powerful hose onto them as they moved across the deck. This scheme was carried out. Alcorn and Huggett transferred to the tug and jumped for ropes hanging down from the Barnhill's foredeck. As they scrambled inboard, the tug's hoses were played on them. The blazing ship was rolling heavily and a mass of debris and burning deck cargo slithered about. Repeated explosions came from her lower deck cargo of carbide. Alcorn and Huggett found their man and put a rope about him below his armpits. They carried him to the side and lowered him as the lifeboat came in close. When he was safe aboard, the rescuers scrambled down themselves and Cox and Hardy backed away and headed for Eastbourne at full speed. After the injured man had been put ashore, there was still no rest for the lifeboat's crew. The blazing Barnhill was a danger to shipping, and it was felt that if she could be beached, some part of her valuable wartime cargo might be salvaged. The Jane Holland, therefore, again put out to sea, returned to Barnhill and helped the tug put a towing line aboard. By this means she was afterwards successfully beached. Meanwhile, it had been discovered that the injured man who had been rushed to hospital was in fact the Barnhill's captain. The captain of the Barnhill, Captain O'Neill, said, "Through it all, I remained aware of everything that was happening. I lost the use of my legs and arms, my ribs were broken, I was weak with loss of blood, but I knew all the while where I was and what I had to do to save myself. I had lost the use of my legs and arms. I knew that if I could get to the ship's bell I could draw attention to myself. When the Barnhill was bombed I was thrown from the bridge and given up for lost. It was pitch black except for the awful glow of the flames when the ship caught fire. I knew that if I could get to the ship's bell I could draw attention to myself. There were 3 of the crew lying on the deck. They were dead. I knew I might be the next one to go. There was only one thing to do. I sat up and wriggled along to the bell a distance of 180 feet, sitting down on the deck all the time with my arms and legs no use to me. I pulled the bell rope with my teeth. I remember waiting for the lifeboat fellas to take me ashore. I remembered how good they were and the doctors too. And through it all I never let my pipe go. Something seemed to tell me that if I kept my pipe I would be alright." The Barnhill was beached, its back broken. Some of the firemen who attended the wreck obviously had some bits and pieces from the wreck. A chap I spoke to had a brother in the Eastbourne Fire Service, and when the fire station moved to its new premises he salvaged a few pieces from the skip. I couldn't get any pictures, but apparently he has the bridge clock and his brother has a plaque, possibly the maker's plate. With its back broken and the sea continuing to break the wreck up further, Barnhill began to lose its cargo. The people of Eastbourne began to collect whatever they could, but the authorities took a very dim view of this and made an example of Arthur Edwards Turner for stealing 7 tanned skins and a bundle of oiled paper. All property from the ship belonged to the Ministry of Shipping. Ultimately Arthur was let off, but it served as a warning to others not to take anything. To counter what was seen as theft, a reward was offered for cheeses. It was reported that police were posted along a 15-mile section of the south coast when high seas broke open the wreck of the bombed cargo vessel Barnhill and washed ashore hundreds of cheeses, each weighing 80 pounds. The coast for miles was dotted with beachcombers. Police forbade the removal of the cheeses for personal use, but the receiver of wreck, a Mr Lambert of Queen's Hotel in Eastbourne, acting on behalf of the Ministry of Shipping, offered a monetary reward for services rendered to those bringing cheeses to the central depot he had established. "I little knew what I was letting myself in for," he told the London Star. "For the past 24 hours there has been a continuous stream of callers claiming their reward. I've even had stacks of cheeses waiting for me at my hotel bearing the names and addresses of the finders. Yesterday alone 1,800 were washed up. Fortunately the cheeses are protected by their rinds and a thick wax covering, so the sea water has not harmed them and we should be able to realise on them." By late April most of the cargo had been salvaged, but not before the Barnhill was bombed again. Charles Lodge was one of the men tasked with unloading the cargo. The conditions we had to undergo are beyond description. At first we had to load skips onto a cargo boat which went via Newhaven to London, but eventually most of the edible goods went overboard. After months of work we eventually got to the ballast, which is a reason for the salvage. I think it was about 150 tonnes of aluminium. We were up to our waist in slimy, oily water and each ingot weighed approximately 70 pounds, so you can imagine the job we had. If my memory is right, it was on a Tuesday. A German plane flew overhead. I remarked to one of my mates working with me, "They will bomb us next," but they just laughed. I said at the time, "It's all right for you to laugh. I was about the only one who could not swim." Well, the fact is, Jerry did bomb the Barnhill the next day and hit her 3 times right where we had been working 5 minutes before. Lucky for all of us it was the only early day off, otherwise I should not be writing to you now. We had just got ashore when I thought it was a siren sounded, but it was the bombs dropping. This second bombing of the wreck was recounted later by a salvage diver who worked on the wreck years later, Hamish Mackenzie. He wrote to Jamie of the Barnhill, "She had copper and zinc ingots. The zinc ones were engraved Hudson Bay Company. There were silver fox furs, left-footed sea boots, no right-footed in case the Nazis captured her, so unless they had a lot of one-footed soldiers they would be of no use, and typewriters amongst her cargo. She was beached stern on and had a 4-bladed non-ferrous prop. Only 2 blades were salvaged as the lower 2 were down in the shingle. A small landing craft was sunk across her stern with the idea of creating a scour to expose those blades, but it wasn't successful. The story goes the ingots were left on her as when she was originally salvaged during the war, she was dive bombed whilst the cargo salvage was taking place and the diving attendants run off for cover, leaving the standard diver on the wreck. He was rescued but refused to work with them anymore and the recovery of the cargo was abandoned. I've not found any pictures of Barnhill from the time of the first salvage to the 1950s when it was salvaged again. Possibly after the initial bombing and the later bombing and years of storms in shallow water, there was not much to see anyway. In April 1956 it was reported that work may be started within a month to salvage the wreck of the cargo ship Barnhill. September 1956. At 6 o'clock on Tuesday evening, when most people were hurrying home from work, the Barnhill salvagemen were just starting. They stood in a huddle at the top of the beach at Langley Point in the driving rain, donning oilskins and diving suits. A tractor stood nearby ready to pull scrap up from the beach. The team, under the leadership of skipper Mike Smith, was planning to blow up the old Barnhill wreck out of the sand by placing charges all around it. Several times the operation had to be postponed owing to bad weather or a rough sea. On Tuesday, however, except for the rain, everything was right. The sea was rolling in and breaking over the wreck as Mr. Smith and his diving companion, John Rummery, waded out, charges in hand, to blow it up. Hanging on the protruding parts of the wreck, they placed the charges in the mud around the hull, kicking and stamping them into position, leaving only the thin white fuse wire showing above the water. When all charges had been laid, the fuses were joined together and a single lead was carried back to shallow water, where Mr. Smith lit the fuse and explained to a Herald chronicler, "They had 3 minutes to get out of the way. There was a mad rush along the beach, easily won by the more experienced salvagemen. When the safety zone had been reached, everyone turned to watch the explosion. The seconds slowly ticked away, then suddenly there was a great roar and a column of water shot over 50 feet into the air, crashing down to the sea again, leaving nothing but bits of the wreck floating in the now black and oily bubbling water. Not even waiting for the water to settle, Mike Smith and John Rummery waded in and fixed a wire rope from the tractor to the loosened parts of the wreck. The tractor took the strain and slowly dragged the scrap up the beach, out of the reach of the sea. One more piece of the Barnhill had been salvaged. By September there had been a few complaints. Every time there is a loud bang, householders around Langley and Pevensey blame the Barnhill salvagemen. "But it's not us at all," says Mike Smith, the skipper of the salvage crew. "Our bangs can't be heard more than 150 yards away, and even then they are just dull thumps. We don't want people to think those sound barrier bangs are ours. It's not the Barnhill, she's all right. It's not the explosions. We know how to handle the stuff and we keep at the right distance. It's the exposed position and diving in water where you can't see what your hands are doing." Skipper Smith, a lean, Dick Barton type, along with his crew of 4, is salvaging anything possible from the wreck. The hull is at present buried 22 to 24 feet in the sand, and though broken in half, is exposed at low water, which is the only time the salvage crew can operate. Salvage operations consist of blowing a piece off of the vessel, getting a line on the section that's blown off and getting the scrap ashore. For over 6 weeks now the work has been in progress, and Skipper Smith's version is, "In all that time we've only had about 3 good days. We've been working on the screw, but when she blew in 4 bits. 2 bits we got away, but the other 2 are down in 14 feet of mud. We've been having a go at those." This goes back to what Hamish Mackenzie said before about trying to get the other 2 blades of the prop off. He continues, "Having a go consists of having a jet of water from a 4-inch hose under tremendous pressure. The diver holds a nozzle down and pumps aboard the motor fishing vessel to supply the jet. It is as much as a diver can do to hold the hose when the pressure is on. John here has been down with the nozzle between his knees," said the skipper. "A lobster came along and took the thing right out of his hand. It was some lobster." John Rummery, a 26-year-old diver living in Langley, took up the story. "I let go and then the lobster let go. The nozzle shot up in the water and I grabbed it again, and we repeated this performance until the lobster got tired. Another time a lobster got me by the ankle and left his mark on me. I killed it with a shovel." Considering that the diver wears thick socks, 2 pairs of trousers, a rubber suit tucked into strong steel-shod boots, the lobsters around Langley Point must have tremendous power. I get this all the time from Jamie. "Don't forget you can't see a thing at this depth," continued Skipper Smith. You can see the vague daylight at 3 feet down, and that's all. If you push the glass of your helmet right against an object, you can just about make out what is metal. The mud causes that. What's dangerous in the work is trying to perch on something you can't see to get a rope around it, or to attach a charge, and a wave pushes you over and you go floating or falling away off balance. You never know what might happen. Using both frogman outfit and full diving equipment, the two divers, skipper Mike Smith and John Rummery, have to wait for the right moment at low tide. Not so much for blasting, but to attach the salvage to the camels, which do the lifting with the rising tide. Camels are airtight tanks, about 30 feet by 9 feet, which have 2 inspection covers on humps, hence the name. Anchored at low tide to a large piece of salvage, the camels rise 18 feet with the tide and are floated away inshore until the salvage grounds, and then the same process is repeated at the next tide. 3 weeks ago we floated a bit of engine salvage off and left it hanging on the camel over the high tide, anchoring the camel and marking it, said the skipper. We came back at dawn in time for low tide again, and a policeman asked us whose camel it was floating away on the horizon. Someone had tripped our anchor for us. We set out and caught the camel 2 miles out. But there's only 18 feet of water out there at low tide, and we had to float over the bar at high. We left her again, and that Sunday of the gale there was a camel floating about just offshore with 15 tons of salvage hanging on her tail. We had to land her right in the trawler fairway, and now the engine scrap is lying outside Princess Park. These camels Mike Smith mentions I think may have solved a bit of a mystery. In one of our old videos we dived on the wreck of the Celtic and couldn't work out what these large boiler looking things were. I don't know if they were dumped on the Celtic for storage or just abandoned there, but I can't help but think that this is where they came from. Towards the end of 1958, salvage operations seemed to have been completed, but wreckage remained. The local fisheries committee had been making efforts to get the wreck moved, but nobody would accept responsibility for doing the job. In his report, the Chief Fishery Officer, Mr. H.M. Boniface, said, "While the wreck will continue to be a potential danger to small fishing boats operating in Pevensey Bay, there does not appear to be anything more that can usefully be done by the committee to get this wreck removed." The wreck, he said, was well into the shore and not apparently considered to be a general navigational hazard. In addition, it was outside the low water mark and as a result outside the eastbourne boundaries and not under the jurisdiction of the town council. Every possible approach, he said, had been made by this committee to all various authorities to no avail. The chairman, Mr. G.L.R. Lapierre, said, "The snag is the purchase of explosives, so the Barnhill remains." In late 1973, plans were in place for building Sovereign Harbour, and it was reported that agents for the Duke of Devonshire's Chatsworth settlement were holding negotiations with the owner of the wreck, Mike Smith, to either blow it up or move it. I wonder what Mike Smith said about it. By this time a young Magnum was diving the Barnhill remains. Dived on a high mainly because we couldn't get the boat off the beach berth at Pevensey Bay on a low water. Using transit marks, the shot was placed inshore of the boilers. As you might expect, the viz wasn't always very good. There is enough debris fill to find your way to the bow where the wreck spikes up around a big pile of anchor chain. A good rummage dive having been extensively salvaged, brass valves and fire hose and nozzle were some things which were found with the chance of a sizable crab. The cargo, which was a mixed bag of food, shoes, metal and goods for the war effort from Canada, was recovered soon after the grounding. There were some copper slab and zinc ingots still there when I dived it. The zinc one had Hudson Bay Company, product of Canada. Newspaper reports and victims are listed on my blog, links in the description. I could only find 2 articles written about those killed. 62-year-old George Frederick Stewart, a captain in the Merchant Navy for 26 years, torpedoed twice in the last war. When the war broke out, he persuaded his friend, Captain Mike O'Neill, master of the steamer Barnhill, to take him on as 3rd officer. He was one of the officers killed when the Barnhill was bombed. My father was never so happy as when he was at sea. I can feel almost glad he has passed out the way he did. Another report goes. The death occurred on Thursday last week of Mrs. Mabel Elizabeth Ann Houseman, wife of Mr. James Harry Houseman of Ruskin Avenue, Felton. Mrs. Houseman, who was the mother of Mr. Ronald Houseman, who, it will be remembered, lost his life in the SS Barnhill when the ship was bombed by the enemy March 20th. Her son, only 18 years of age, was on the bridge acting as quartermaster when one of the bombs fell, killing him and 5 other officers outright. Mrs. Houseman never recovered from the shock of her son's death. After being in hospital at Windsor for 10 weeks, she came home, but survived for only another 3 weeks.